To Latin America now, where another year of serious unrest could lie ahead. Now, in 2019, a wave of protests broke out across the continent. So let's take a look at some of the countries affected. Well, Venezuela remains in the grip of an economic crisis. A year ago, opposition leader Juan Guaido claimed the presidency from Nicolas Maduro, who's accused of election fraud and dictatorial rule. Now, meanwhile, Argentina, well, it is in a deep recession and unable to pay its foreign debt of more than $100 billion. In neighbouring Bolivia, President Evo Morales was pushed from power in November, while in Chile and Colombia, protesters are demanding better governance and solutions to economic inequality. Well, for more on this now, we're joined by DW's Nicole Fröhlich in the Colombian capital, Bogota. Good to see you, Nicole. Now, have you noticed any similarities in the situations between various South American countries, such as Colombia, such as Chile, for example, giving rise to that unrest?
Although at their core, these movements are, of course, very different, there are significant similarities. These are grassroots movements started by young people, by students who were fed up of a system that they inherited from a generation that was perhaps too scared to speak up for themselves, but is now embracing the movement. They're mostly organizing on social media, and as globalized citizens, they are, of course, looking at other countries for inspiration and solidarity. Another parallel there is between especially Chile and Colombia is the amount of demands that protesters have. This is not a protest movement against a president, a politician, a single law. This is against the system. Here in Colombia, for example, demands range from a pension reform to a full implementation of the peace agreement with the FARC, a better protection for indigenous people, and many people are also asking for a healthcare reform. And I talked to some people here in Bogota to find out why.
Juan Manuel loves working at the hospital. He likes to take his time with patients, making sure they feel safe and that they understand their conditions and treatments. But doing the job with such dedication has become increasingly difficult for many people working in Colombian healthcare.
One out of 4 healthcare professionals are unhappy. One of our system's shortcomings is the pay that physicians receive. Some of them have to work 2 or 3 jobs to make ends meet.
But overworked and underpaid doctors and nurses aren't the only ones feeling let down by Colombia's healthcare system. Even in the capital, Bogota, where there are plenty of hospitals and clinics, patients are finding it impossible to get even the most urgent appointments.
I call the hospital every day, but they don't have time for me. I tell them, please, I suffer from multiple sclerosis. I need special treatment. They never have time.
They give you an appointment after 1 or even 3 months. It's horrible. The healthcare service here is awful.
Such problems are related to structural weaknesses. Colombia's healthcare system is dominated by private insurance companies. Numerous of these intermediaries between patients and doctors have hit the headlines for embezzlement and corruption. The president of Bogota's Medical Association says it was their greed that caused the system to implode.
The less services these companies provide, the more money they make. So the insurance company denies treatments or takes a long time to authorize them, allowing the patient's condition to deteriorate, or they even refuse to cover therapy altogether.
Necessary treatments denied without explanation. It almost destroyed this young woman's family. Her brother had alarming symptoms, but his doctors weren't allowed to run the tests they needed to diagnose him.
It took his insurance company 7 months to authorize a CAT scan. From January until August. When they finally got the results, they saw he had a brain tumor. When we found out he had a tumor, he'd already lost his hearing and suffered irreversible brain damage.
Mariana is a nurse herself and has been participating in the protests. Suffering from the healthcare system's shortcomings as a patient and a professional, she urges her fellow Colombians to keep fighting for change.
I'm confident there'll be change someday. Maybe not exactly how we want it to be. That would be perfect. And I don't believe that's going to happen. But some kind of change, no matter how small.
For the time being, it doesn't look like the government will heed people's calls. But in the waiting room and on the streets, Colombians have run out of patience.
Well, straight back over to our correspondent, Nicole Fröhlich there in Bogota. Nicole, people are clearly running out of patience. Are there leaders who can represent them in their struggle?
Well, we have to bear in mind that this is a protest against the entire political class. So there's not one opposition figure that could step up and demonstrate in the protesters' claims. Here in Colombia, the strike committee, made up of several unions, has been trying to establish talks with the government, but these have failed over and over again because the committee wants these talks to be branded as negotiations, and that is something the government doesn't want to give into. So here semantics are getting into the way of finding a solution. In Chile, the situation is different. It's a completely leaderless movement. People are organizing in groups according to where they live or where their interests lie, what they care most about. But there is not one person or group that can represent the entire movement. Some people say that this is just proof of how democratic these protests are, but it could ultimately lead to a weakening of the entire movement.
So clearly diverse strands across the continent, but nevertheless, what can people in these countries expect in 2020?
It's hard to say. Seeing the commitment of people out in the streets, it's difficult to believe that this could just fizzle out. It is still a great opportunity for embattled leaders like Sebastián Piñera, like Iván Duque here in Colombia, to truly listen to the people, to show commitment and honesty in finding a solution to this and change the face of their countries forever. But if the past couple of months are anything to go by, this is very unlikely to happen.
All right, our correspondent Nicole Fröhlich monitoring that wave of unrest for us. Thanks a lot, Nicole. Good to speak to you.